So the Preston and especially Aberdeen weekends in July 1970 were a dark chapter in the exclusive brethren history. Of course, ever since that day there's been a massive attempt to twist the truth. At first, scriptures like Abishag, who went to comfort David in his old age, got in bed with him, were used to excuse Jim Taylor taking Madeline Kerr, wife of Alan, who was staying in the house, who gate crashed under Jim Taylor's orders because James Alec Gardner felt it wiser to keep them apart. I do believe it was right for a man in charge of his house to enter the bedroom. He took Stanley McCallum with him after this married woman had been into Jim Taylor's bedroom for hours on end, multiple times during the weekend, and I hasten to add, many times before that in other locations. I've got ample witness to that. And afterwards, as photographed by the press in New York. Of course, the brethren shut down any inquiry into this matter, certainly any public inquiry, by, do you accept JT Jr. was a pure man? Unless you say yes, they stop all communication. Well, that's a giveaway, isn't it? Why not friendlily talk about what happened that weekend? There were many books, valiant efforts by Norman Adams to expose the whole thing in the press, later the Holland book matter, Uwineel. Robert Stott, godly man of the Depot, published a super article, If We're Walking the Light. But the facts and witness statements have gone to Ian Price, who's son of Derek, and that brings up the fact that Alan Price, that's Ian's grandfather, was one of those that preached on the Sunday after Jim Taylor had gone home and been picked up by James III from the house. So he was regarded as being a man of some stature in the UK, a bit like, I suppose, Garth and John Rich are now, because they seem to be validated by the leader. So Alan Price had tremendous influence. And after the preaching, a number of, I think Eric Burr made an announcement, or something was said at the end of the meetings on the Sunday, that the weekend had been out of order and needed looking into, and issues taking as appropriate, which the genuine Aberdeen brethren genuinely did to the best of their ability, by including being in touch with New York and the local administration there, A.B. Parker, who was well respected, E.E. Hoyt, I think, and one or two others. So the whole thing was a mess, and the brethren, who are now the exclusive brethren and form the 55,000 PBCC, were deceived and believed a lie, and they had to acknowledge their loyalty to Jim Taylor, and in many localities, leaders would say it was a privilege if the leader asks your wife to go to bed with him. Well, it's not mainstream Christianity, the world at large. Yeah, there's a loose world, but what husband would be glad if another man asked his wife? What good husband would be glad if another man asked his wife to go to bed with him? I leave the question. You might say, well, the 60s up to 70 were a permissive society, but that shouldn't infiltrate a religion. That's no excuse. Alan Robertson's report to the Daily Mail, which is there for anyone to check, is truly shocking as to the behaviour that James Taylor Jr. Conducted towards him. I don't want to go into that anymore because it's repulsive. But I felt mighty sorry for Alan Robertson when he told me, went over the details of how senior brethren, including my brother Garth, went to him to try and bribe him into withholding his story. Of course, if he was just thinking for himself, like I'm afraid so many brethren do, he'd have taken the money and let him off the hook. But he had a moral duty to expose the truth as per Ephesians 5 and shine the light into a dark place. And credit to him. And that's what I'm trying to do. And Tony McCorkle was another who later, much later, 2009 I should think, tried to, or 10, I don't know, tried to shine a light into the covering up of paedophile activity by Bruce Hales, of which he was part. Well, credit to him, credit to Michael Batchelard for exposing the Brethren hierarchy and the awful harm meted out to individuals in his book. Is it Behind the Exclusive Brethren? And Rebecca Stott in The Days of Rain. So these books, and I've just, there's big concern about cults in America, and Rebecca's book is being studied in schools. I can say that with conviction. I've had people ring me. Is being studied in schools in America to enlighten young people's eyes, enlighten young people as to the danger of cults. And they are using the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church as the model through Rebecca's book. Now, my appeal would be that you, Garth, and others, and those who run the education system around the world should bring those books into the Brethren schools and let the children know the other side of the story, what's really happened, the suffering that really went on amongst the communities during the 60s. How the fishermen all had to give their jobs up because they're in some association. And people had to leave the civil service because of the Official Secrets Act. Who's secretive? The Brethren are secretive. You're hiding the truth. And yet, Brethren in the past had to leave secure jobs, livelihoods. Oh, the trauma, the upset, the trouble, the travesty. It's just unbelievable. I weep when I think about it. The sufferings that have gone before and still continuing to this day with a vicious application of the tool of separation, the sword of separation, wielded by officials who are hard, callous, arbitrary narcissists who have no regard for people's feelings. It's got to stop. So, let me just say that the aftermath of 70, I mean, in the house they called a doctor, Dr. Thompson, who gave an injection to Taylor, which he needed, as far as I can see. And, you know, women were called up to Jim Taylor during the Preston meetings in the house at Aberdeen, and were fondled freely by him, with the husbands in attendance, and, you know, unbelievable behaviour. And yet, that's all covered up and the Brethren aren't told. I was told, dear man in Leeds who was at Preston, Eric Langfield, was not part of the hierarchy, told me that yeah, he thought that the sisters were going to have to expose their breasts during that weekend at Aberdeen because Jim Taylor was so fresh. At least he was honest. He was looking, I don't know whether he was looking forward to it or not, but hey, come on, let's be honest. Yeah, you're right. When all that salacious talk, with sexual undertones, you do wonder what's going to happen next. And You know, right now, there are genuine brethren who I've met who are very worried that Hales has got the power to do something terrible to the brethren. Indeed, perhaps get them to some central location and do them harm. All the harm he's done so far, he might do them more harm, but much better to throw the towel in, Bruce, and hand over to the rank and file, to the genuine brethren, who will, in a mutual way, as going by scripture, following Paul's teaching, act far more like the body of Christ than you ever will be able to as a ruthless dictator. So the time has come, Bruce. Don't deceive us anymore. Don't deceive the government. Don't pretend you're charitable when you're a business. Don't deceive your own people into thinking you look after them when you're despising them. Actually, you're treating them like pawns on your chessboard. Start respecting your own people and the feelings of others who are hurt by your administration. How ridiculous that, you know, Simonton comes on the scene and big issues taken over James Mackay, a wonderful leader in Leeds, because he wouldn't address the Spirit at the supper. What a detail! The brethren don't address the Spirit in the supper these days, so maybe Mackay was right and you guys were wrong. Taking little points of ministry and forcing them to the point of defaming people, good ministers who love the Lord, is wrong. And this is how you've got your power, at the expense of others. And that's how these political leaders in the world have got power. We should make the most of what we've got, make the most of people, invite their contribution. Don't cut people's hymns out of the book because they've left your fellowship as their hymn book. Just realise that they had their own links with the Lord and perspective, and you can still sing their hymns. Don't cut people out of your photograph books when they leave. They're still the fathers to the children in those photographs, still husbands to the wives until they're divorced. But these divorces, this breakup, has been forced by you, Mr. Hales, and by your system, your hierarchy. They have not been done voluntarily by the husbands who've had to leave because of your system. I can assure you that certainly applies in my case. Not that the Lord can't come in and turn things around for our benefit. All things work together for good. So I'm moving forward. I'm not moving backwards at all. I'm moving forward, very much so. I'm looking forward to great times ahead. And this is just an exposure of the truth of the system that you're leading. And you know, at that, I think that, oh yeah, I just wanted to say that after Aberdeen, just between so obviously there's ferment from the Sunday through to the Tuesday night, when the brethren were made to declare their loyalty to Jim Taylor despite his impurity. So they had to say he was a pure man when he wasn't, quite frankly. Absolute disaster. And I was telling the story about Alan Price. When he finished preaching and they gathered round him, he thought that Jim Taylor would have to be withdrawn from. He then went back home and was persuaded by his son Derek that not to take the hard line but to accept, and he had such influence that he contacted brethren and they contacted him around the world, and by Tuesday night they all had to declare their loyalty to Jim Taylor despite what he'd indulged in, including his slurred semi-blasphemous language in the meetings at Aberdeen, of which I've heard the tapes, and they're readily available, and the brethren should get them and hear them so that they can form their own opinion rather than be forced to think a certain way by you, Mr. Hales. And Alan Price had the honesty, you might say, to get up and give a word on the Tuesday night. I read that scripture, my foot had well nigh slipped. So he actually was admitting that, yes, at Aberdeen he agreed that Jim Taylor should be dealt with, but then his sons brought him round. And that's why I've confided in Ian Price, because he is the son of Derek, grandson of Alan, and we need to know these facts. And then things proceeded. Anne Gibb was in the house that weekend, so it was like a dark place, and she came in at 4 o'clock that morning. She was staying outside for a long time. She knew there was something evil going on, so she didn't go in until 4 a.m. I think by which time Jim Taylor had left the house. And anyway, I was speaking to Ken Hollands, lovely man who had to leave Aberdeen on principle, like many others. John Turner's another, Jim's brother. I asked him about whether he was at the reading at Glasgow with Stanley McCallum on the Monday. Oh yeah, he said. He said it was a super reading. And he was concerned lest the circle be broken, and the brethren remained untapped. And he took up the script, read the scripture, "I will keep in perfect peace the mind stayed on thee." Stanley's whole attitude of forgiveness and grace towards Jim Taylor, despite what happened to him, is a lesson book to us all. The whole thing was turned around, and we were told he was a homosexual. Well, how Jim Taylor worked that out overnight, as soon as he walked into his bedroom, I don't know, because he had him, he was a minister with Jim Taylor, well respected right through his whole reign. So suddenly turns on him and withdraws from him on the plane on the way home after he'd given this reading. And he said it was all about the importance of our link with Jesus. This is the Monday night at Glasgow. Alec Craig was the man there. He had to leave as well. Lovely man. His daughter married John Turner, Jim's brother, now in Malvern. Jim's Chippenham, of course. And Alec was supporting the need to fall back on our own personal links with the Lord. So, and Ken went on to say that, I said, well, can you not get into Preston, get into the brethren meeting rooms to actually tell them the truth of Aberdeen? We need men out here who will tell the brethren, back me up. And I've not got a vendetta, I'm just telling the truth, that's all, I state the truth. But we need others to step forward and tell the brethren that, hey, they're in a precarious situation because their refuge has been in a pack of lies. It says in Isaiah, their refuge is lies or something similar. So he said, you know what he said to me? Ken goes around prisons, converting prisoners, does an excellent job. I really respect him. I went to listen to a super reading of his last Sunday and a preaching in Lytham St Anne's. A lovely brother, very fervent for the truth, loves Christ. And he said, actually, Lance, it would be easier getting into the prisons to convert people than it would be to get into the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. I think he's right. But why should that be? Why should that be? Because they don't want the light. They don't want the truth. They are insulating themselves against the people that could expose them to themselves so that they get right. I'm not here to threaten anybody about anything, but we'd hate to see lovely brethren who have been deluded and are ignorant as to the facts be in trouble. That's why I'm doing this, to enlighten them as to the truth, so that they can make their minds up, their own minds, what to do, rather than be coerced by a corrupt hierarchy.